Chapter 116. You're too stupid. Yes, Huo Liancheng snorted. He didn't look at Pujigan. He pulled Jianyun towards the elevator. Pujigan's heart sank. He did not know what Huo Liancheng meant by that. Huowever, when he saw Huo Liancheng holding Jianyun's hand, he knew young Master Huo must have liked this girl. He looked at Jianyun again and saw that she had removed her makeup. She stood beside Huo Liancheng with a low face. Although she was dressed normally, she could not hide her elegant and refined temperament. Her pretty face did not have any makeup, but it was more attractive. Pujigan could not help feeling a little itchy in his heart. When Jianyun had just arrived, he had already taken a fancy to her. However, this girl's temper was too strong. He had tried to be nice to her many times, but she rejected him. The gifts and money that he sent were also returned to him without changing a single word. At that time, there were too many women around him, and he had everything he wanted. Moreover, Jianyun's dancing at that time had indeed made his clubhouse earn money. So he did not force it. He did not expect that after not seeing her for a few years, she actually became more and more beautiful. It made people want to have her. Pujigang followed beside Huo Liancheng and waited for the elevator with him. While thinking about how to speak to Huo Liancheng, he kept looking at Jianyun. The more he looked at her, the more regretful he was. He regretted not making the first move, but he thought about it again. Compared to the huge benefits Huo Liancheng could bring him, he did not need this woman. Moreover, Jianyun's temper did not seem as fierce as a few years ago. She did not want to be with any. Pujigang saw her obediently being held by Huo Liancheng today. This girl must have thought it through and wanted to date Huo Liancheng. Then, when Huo Liancheng was tired of playing, it would not be too late for him to take over. He would definitely eat this piece of meat. Miss Jian, did you sleep well last night? Pujigang did not mind being called by Huo Liancheng and turned to Jianyun. Thanks to Boss Pu, very good. Jianyun got angry when she saw Pujigang. Her tone was very rude. She did not believe what Huo Liancheng said. She thought Pujigang would not do such a despicable thing. However, when she saw him outside the door, she knew that he must have stayed here all night. If he was a gentleman, Pujigang would not let her alone in the room with an unfamiliar man. She was still too naive and easily trusted people. That's good. Pujigang pretended not to hear the anger in Jianyun's words and smiled indifferently. His eyes fell on Jianyun and Huo Liancheng's hands that were holding each other. He smiled and said, Miss Jian would not thank me for being able to know young Master Huo? Thank you. Jianyun's tone was stiff. Her back was straight. Anyone could hear the sarcasm in her words. How did you talk to Pujigang? A muscular middle-aged man who followed Pujigang was not happy with Jianyun's rudeness. He took a step forward and raised his fist to intimidate Jianyun. Before Jianyun could move, Huo Liancheng had already pulled her and protected her behind him. He coldly looked at the muscular man and released his aura. He was so shocked that the muscular man took a few steps back. Get down. Don't be rude to young Master Huo. Pujigang hurriedly shouted when he saw this. He was shocked. He had a feeling that Huo Liancheng was very protective of Jianyun. He held Jianyun's hand tightly throughout the whole process. There were several times when Jianyun wanted to struggle free, but was caught by him again. Could it be that the two of them knew each other long ago? If that was the case, then he would send Jianyun to him. Doesn't that mean, young Master Huo? Pujigang looked up and saw that the elevator was about to come up. He did not think about his guess and quickly said, The thing I mentioned to you last time. I will think about it. The elevator came. Huo Liancheng carried Jianyun in and left this sentence. Pujigang did not dare to ask any more questions. Although he had a backer in Qinghu City, his background was nothing compared to Huo Liancheng's. Young Master Huo. Wait. Pujigang saw that the elevator door was about to close, so he quickly reached out to block it. He then took a paper bag from an old man behind him and handed it over respectfully. Young Master Huo, I wanted to invite you to have breakfast with me. Later on, I thought you had a lot of things to do. So I asked the kitchen to make these special desserts. They're all hot, so I gave them to you on the way. Huo Liancheng looked at Jianyun and signaled her to go and take them. Then he nodded at Pujigang and said lightly, Let's go. The elevator door closed at that moment and started to descend slowly. In the elevator, Jianyun looked at the bag in her hand. Although the fragrance assailed her nose, and it looked very delicious, not only did she not have an appetite, she also had the urge to throw these things on the ground and step on them. You are so stupid that you believe everyone. You still have the nerve to ruin these food. Huo Liancheng snatched the paper bag from Jianyun's hand and snorted. He did not hold back and ridiculed Jianyun. Is he looking for you for something? Jianyun's hand was still held by Huo Liancheng. She struggled a few times but could not get away. She could not help but dig the back of his hand with her nails. Yes, he wants me to invest in his property. Huo Liancheng glanced at Jianyun and used his fingers to press down on her restless nails. You didn't agree? Jianyun asked. So he gave me to you as a gift to please you? Jianyun gritted her teeth and asked angrily. Huo Liancheng replied. At this time, his face also darkened. His sharp eyes stared at Jianyun. That's why I said you are stupid. You are actually willing to believe him and not me. Both of you are not good people, Jian Yun muttered in a low voice. She did not expect Pujigan to find her to dance for another purpose. Otherwise, she would not have come no matter what. Is it because I have to force you to be a good person? Huo Liancheng's voice turned cold. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Jian Yun. His eyes were also filled with coldness. Have you ever thought about it? If I hadn't met you last night, what would have happened to you? Jian Yun did not dare to speak anymore, because she also thought of this possibility. If the one in the room last night wasn't Huo Liancheng, was it an old man with a fat head, or was it a man with a violent tendency to abuse and a special interest? And would she still be standing here all right? Therefore, she had only been scolded by him last night. Even if she had been strangled by him, she was already very lucky compared to the injuries she might suffer from meeting other men. Huo Liancheng's body was full of hostility. When he saw Jian Yun last night, he guessed what Pujigan was up to. On one hand, he was secretly glad. On the other hand, he was also angry at Pujigan. He did not dare to think about it. If Pujigan wanted to curry favor with other men, so what would happen to Jian Yun? In silence, the elevator stopped. It was the underground parking lot. Huo Liancheng pulled Jian Yun out, opened the door, and walked to the car. He took off Jian Yun's backpack and threw it in. Jian Yun went over and was about to get into the car, but Huo Liancheng grabbed her collar and lifted her off. He slammed the back door, opened the door of the passenger seat, and pushed Jian Yun in. Chapter 117. People I met 6 years ago. Jian Yun obediently got into the car. She was still in a state of fear. She really didn't dare to think about it. If that really happened, then what should she do? She was alone and had no one to rely on. Her mother was still waiting for her money to save her life in the hospital. She could not afford to offend someone like Pujigang. So the answer was very obvious. Huo Liancheng started the car. He opened the paper bag Pujigan gave him and took a look. There were 7 or 8 small bags inside. It seemed that there were a lot of different types of breakfast. Eat it. Huo Liancheng handed one of the bags to Jian Yun and said, I won't eat it. Jian Yun said angrily. She avoided Huo Liancheng's hand and did not want to take the paper bag. If you don't eat, you won't have the strength to grow your brain. Huo Liancheng sneered. He picked up a bun and stuffed it into Jian Yun's mouth. Jian Yun did not hear anything good from his mouth. She could not find any words to refute him. She could only take a bite of the bun as if she was venting her anger. She found the food in the Myth Hotel was quite delicious, so she took a few bites to settle it. Jian Yun looked in the paper bag again. She opened each paper bag and saw that the desserts were very exquisite. She took a bite of each and ate it if it was good. If it was not good, she threw it into the bag. Huo Liancheng had already driven the car out of the parking lot. He looked at Jian Yun's appearance. Don't just focus on yourself. Don't forget that I didn't eat breakfast either, he said. You don't need to grow your brain, so you don't need to eat breakfast. These are all mine. Jian Yun was angry at him for his venomous tongue. She buried her head and drank the milk. She did not want to care about him at all. Why are you so narrow-minded? Huo Liancheng was amused by Jian Yun's words. There was a red light in front of him and he stopped the car. He reached out and pulled Jian Yun's face. He took a bun from the paper bag and stuffed it into his mouth. I bit that. Jian Yun saw that Huo Liancheng happened to be the bun she took a bite of and threw it back. She immediately looked conflicted and embarrassed. She did not even care about him pulling her face. I don't dislike you. Huo Liancheng finished his food in 2 bites. At this time, the green light turned on and the car continued to drive forward. However, Jian Yun turned her head when she heard this. Her brows also knitted together. After a while, she said in a muffled voice, Didn't you say last night that you disliked me for being dirty? Huo Liancheng heard her and looked at Jian Yun. He saw her small face darken and his sword-like brows could not help but raise. You hold a grudge like this? I even remember the ants I raised when I was young being trampled to death. Jian Yun said calmly. No one raised ants. Huo Liancheng sneered. Don't change the topic. Jian Yun glared at him. For some reason, although Jian Yun and Huo Liancheng had not known each other for long, every time they were together, as long as he didn't have a cold expression on his face, they would always be able to get along very naturally. Even if they kept arguing and occasionally had intense arguments like last night, he had always tolerated her before. Last night was the first time he had attacked her. Although she was not injured, when he pinched her, she was so afraid that she thought he would break her neck. Until now, she still remembered very clearly, so Jian Yun's feelings towards Huo Liancheng were very complicated now. On one hand, she had to rely on him, and on the other hand, she was afraid of him. Being so close to him always made her feel uneasy. Are you afraid of me? Perhaps Huo Liancheng was not a careful person, but he was patient with Jian Yun. Otherwise, he would not be so thick-skinned as to chase after Jian Yun after she repeatedly rejected him. He could see that after what happened last night, Jian Yun avoided looking at him. There were several times when he touched her, and she trembled. It was obvious that she did not want to come into contact with his body. Jian Yun quickly looked at him and lowered her head without saying anything. I won't hurt you. It was my fault last night. I shouldn't have done it. I won't do it next time. Liancheng gulped. He stared at the road in front of him. His voice sounded in this narrow space. It was low, as if the strings of the zither were vibrating on the surface of the water. Jianyun could not react for a moment. Was he apologizing to her? How could a man like him apologize? Here. Liancheng looked at Jianyun's stunned eyes. The curve of his mouth became gentle. He suddenly reached out his hand to Jianyun. Jianyun only felt a light flash at the corner of her eye. She turned her head and saw a red rope hanging on Liancheng's slender and pretty fingers. There was a special ring hanging under the red rope. As the car moved forward, the ring gently rippled. This is not mine. I am the one who took care of it for someone else. Jianyun took the ring. Her fingers stroked the pattern on the ring and softly said. Liancheng replied. Jianyun didn't wait for him to ask. She said, 6 years ago, I went to Yellow Mountain to play and met someone. I helped him, and he gave me this. Who is it? Liancheng swallowed his saliva and said in a low voice. A man. Jianyun smiled. He has a big beard. I still don't know what he looks like. Liancheng suddenly turned his head to look at Jianyun. He saw her hand was tied with a red string. She raised the ring to the same level as her eyes. She tilted her head and stared at the ring. The morning sunlight shone on her face through the window. The 2 rows of eyelashes that were as thick as a fan cast a dense shadow in front of her eyes. The fur on her face was so fine that it looked like a delicious peach. He gave it to you? Liancheng looked away and asked again. But if I meet him again, I will give it back to him. Jianyun untied the red rope and put it around her neck. She wore the ring with her thumb and extended her left index finger as well. She smiled and said, This is worn by a man. I wear it too big, so I can only hang it around my neck as a protective talisman. A protective charm? Liancheng raised his eyebrows. This ring has this effect? I think so. Jianyun did not continue on this topic. She put the ring inside her clothes and looked outside the car. She said in surprise, Why is the sky dark? There was a sun just now. Liancheng glanced at Jianyun's chest out of the corner of his eye. Through her clothes, he could still see the shape of the ring. It was close to her rising and falling curves. He could not help but tighten his grip on the steering wheel. Not long after that, Liancheng's hand. Not long after, Liancheng stopped the car. Jianyun saw that he really drove the car to where she lived, and could not help but wonder, Why did you come to my house? Change your clothes and get your ID. Liancheng turned off the engine and pulled out the car keys. He got out of the car and walked to the passenger seat. He opened the door and held Jianyun's hand with one hand. He took the bag of breakfast with the other and pulled her out. What ID do you want? Jianyun walked 2 steps and remembered that her bag was still in the back seat. She turned back to get her bag. Liancheng did not say anything. He seemed to be hungry. He opened the paper bag and took out the remaining snacks. Jianyun ate. He stuffed them into his mouth one by one. Then he drank milk from the straw Jianyun drank before. Jianyun's eyelids were trembling when she saw this. She really wanted to stop him. But when the words came to her mouth, she held them back. Chapter 118. Don't have a boyfriend. Jianyun was getting more and more unable to see through Liancheng. This man was really a contradictory combination. When he was in a good mood, he was gentle and gentle. He was so gentle that he could easily flirt with others. However, when his face turned cold, he was like a moving ice mountain. It made people's hearts turn cold, and they did not dare to approach him. Furthermore, he had clearly been furious last night and scolded her for being dirty. Today, he did not mind eating the leftovers of her food. Jianyun even suspected that he was not normal. Forget it. Maybe he had this hobby, but he liked eating leftovers. Why does it sound so strange? Furthermore, when Jianyun saw him drinking milk from the straw she used before, she felt goosebumps all over his back. Was this the same as kissing? Jianyun did not want to investigate further. When the elevator arrived, Liancheng had already finished his meal. He casually threw the empty paper bag into the trash can. This building had been around for some years. Jianyun and Luo Yanyan had rented this place for 2 years. Some of the residents in the building did not see each other when they looked up. There were also a few familiar aunties. When they were waiting for the elevator, 2 aunties came back to buy vegetables. When they saw Jianyun, they greeted her. Little Jane, why aren't you working today? Oh right, is your mother better? I heard from Yanyan that your mom is in the hospital. If you need anything, just say it. Don't be polite with auntie. The one who spoke was a fat woman in her 50s. Her surname was Wang, and she moved here from Boshan, so she usually treated Jianyun very well. She's better. Thank you, auntie. Jianyun smiled. By the way, do you still remember what I told you last time? I sent your picture to my nephew. He was very satisfied with you, and kept asking when you have time to meet him. Aunt Wang put the vegetable basket on the ground and held Jianyun's hand very enthusiastically. She started to use her skills as a middle-aged woman in China. My nephew is 30 years old this year. He is 17 to 18 years old. He is very handsome. Think about it. Auntie, Jianyun was about to say that her mother was still in the hospital. She was not in the mood to go on a blind date. Suddenly, she thought that Liancheng was still beside her. She subconsciously turned her head to take a look. Sure enough, she saw that President Huo's face had turned completely black. Jian Yun originally wanted to stand on Hu Lianqing's side and avoid Auntie Wang's nagging attack, but she was helpless as Auntie Wang pulled her back. At the same time, she bragged to another aunt about how good her nephew was when he was admitted into the research institute. Then, the two of them persuaded Jian Yun to quickly find a good man to marry while he was young. They even considered who would take care of the child. Jian Yun's face turned black when she healed. Not long after, the two aunties found the tall and handsome Hu Lianqing. He was like a cat that saw a fish. His eyes lit up as he pushed Jian Yun away and rushed forward. This gentleman isn't a resident here. Is he here to look for someone? How old are you? Are you 30? Are you married? Do you have a girlfriend? Where do you work? What's your monthly salary? I have a niece who is 29 years old. She's 168 years old. She's also pretty. She's a good match for you. Young man, do you want to think about it? Jian Yun heard this and immediately covered her forehead, but when she saw Hu Lianqing's dark and handsome face, she could not help but secretly laugh. The corner of her mouth was about to twitch. Hu Lianqing naturally would not care about these two aunties' boring questions. Fortunately, the elevator arrived at this time. Hu Lianqing was the first to enter. Jian Yun saw him looking at her and quickly broke free from Aunt Wang's hand. Jian Yun flashed into the elevator. Hu Lianqing pressed the button to close the door. The two aunties also bent down to pick up the vegetable basket. When they looked up again, they saw that the elevator had already ascended. In the elevator, the air pressure was very low. Jian Yun saw that Hu Lianqing's expression was not good, so she smartly stood at the furthest distance from him. When Jian Yun left the elevator, Jian Yun held the key and opened the door. Hu Lianqing said unhappily, "Why didn't you tell them that you have a boyfriend?" "A boyfriend?" Jian Yun glanced at Hu Lianqing. She changed her shoes and took out her phone from her bag and put it on the table. When she saw the dust on the table, she frowned and said, "Where do I have a boyfriend?" "Do you mean Zhou Xiaolong? He is not my boyfriend. I have no contact with him for a long time." Hu Lianqing narrowed his eyes. He saw Jian Yun walking towards her bedroom. Suddenly he walked over and grabbed her wrist. He suddenly hugged her and pressed her down. He did not allow her to resist and kissed her. Jian Yun subconsciously tilted her head, and Hu Lianqing's lips kissed the corner of her mouth. But then, he pinched her cheek and pulled her face back. This time, he kissed her squarely. Jian Yun's hand was locked by Hu Lianqing, and her cheek was pinched by him again. She did not even have the chance to resist, and could only close her eyes and allow him to wreak havoc. Hu Lianqing kissed very deeply. He seemed to like this kind of French kiss very much. The few times he forcefully kissed Jian Yun, it almost made her unable to breathe before it ended. This time, it was the same. When Hu Lianqing finally let go of Jian Yun only felt that the air in her lungs was almost sucked dry by him. Moreover, she was very reluctant to be kissed by him from the bottom of her heart. But no matter how she looked at it, she could not reject him. "Now do you know who your boyfriend is?" Hu Lianqing's chest was also rising and falling. He was staring at Jian Yun. His deep black eyes were like an abyss that could not be seen. "Don't you think your actions are very contradictory?" Jian Yun met Hu Lianqing's eyes and gasped, "You make me feel at a loss." "What about now?" Hu Lianqing said and kissed Jian Yun again. "My attitude has always been very clear. You are the one who turned a blind eye to it." Every word he said, he kissed her. A nice smell lingered around Jian Yun's nose. His voice was so gentle. In his deep eyes, there was only her reflection. For a moment, Jian Yun felt her heart beating wildly and her face slowly turned red. But Jian Yun immediately thought of the words he had humiliated her, and her heart turned cold. She turned her head and avoided his touch. She said in a low voice, "Don't touch me. I've dirtied you." Still holding a grudge? Hu Lianqing held Jian Yun's chin and forced her to look at him. He could not help but sigh. "I was the one who said the wrong thing, okay? When I saw you appear at that kind of occasion, Pu Jigang asked you to accompany me at night. Do you think I can stop thinking about it?" Jian Yun's eyelashes trembled. She bit her lips and did not say anything. Even though Hu Lianqing had apologized, she still felt that it was strange in her heart. He was so gentle to her and kept pestering her because she had what he wanted. "All right, it's getting late. Go and change your clothes. Give me your household register." Hu Lianqing pinched Jian Yun's cheek. "Why do you need a household register?" Jian Yun still could not react. "Why do you ask so many questions?" Hu Lianqing knocked Jian Yun on the head. He ignored Jian Yun and walked straight to her bedroom. Then he accurately pulled open the drawer of the bedside table and turned back to ask Jian Yun, "Do you take it yourself, or do I take it?" Jian Yun was shocked. "How did you know it was there?" "It's getting late. If you dawdle any longer, the Civil Affairs Bureau will get off work soon." Hu Lianqing narrowed his eyes. Chapter 119. Mommy woke up. "Civil service? Are you kidding?" Jian Yun suddenly remembered what Hu Lianqing said last night about going to register and the 2 handwritten marriage contracts. She immediately screamed, "Could you be serious? Do I look like I'm joking?" Hu Lianqing found Jian Yun's household register from the pile of documents in the drawer. He opened it and took a look. He walked to the wardrobe and picked out a white shirt and coat for Jian Yun. When he saw that his coat was still hanging in Jian Yun's closet, he could not help but smile. When Jianyun changed her clothes, Huo Liancheng pulled her downstairs and sat in the car. Her mind was still in a daze. He really wanted to register marriage with her? Just for the thing he wanted from her? However, what was it that made him want to marry her, even at the cost of half his fortune? It was a normal plot. Shouldn't he go to the notarized property first and try his best to protect his own fortune? Jianyun really couldn't see through Huo Liancheng's plan. Huo Liancheng saw her frowning all the way, so he asked, "What are you thinking about?" Jianyun looked at him and thought for a moment, then said, "I am thinking. Do you want to kidnap me? In the name of marriage, sell me to a human trafficker and marry an African chief as a wife?" "That's a good idea." Huo Liancheng could not help laughing when he heard that. Then he pinched Jianyun's small face and smiled. "But I can't bear to marry you out." Jianyun could not figure it out now. She pretended not to hear the ambiguity in Huo Liancheng's words. Moreover, she did not believe him all along. Thinking about it, she suddenly turned her head and asked him, "Is someone in your family sick?" Hearing this, Huo Liancheng's entire body shook. His big hand that was holding the steering wheel trembled, but he immediately covered up his embarrassment and asked Jianyun in a low voice, "Why do you ask? Is it liver or kidney disease?" "If it's heart disease, then I can't help it. I only have one heart." Jianyun's eyes were filled with hesitation. When she thought that Huo Liancheng came for her kidney or liver, a layer of cold air immediately climbed up her back. When she looked at him again, it was as if she had seen a killing demon. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that this possibility was very high. Otherwise, why would he pay half of his wealth to her once he got a divorce on the marriage agreement? It was clearly because he was uneasy and wanted to use money to make up for her. Did I guess right? Jianyun saw Huo Liancheng's handsome face was solemn and the corner of her mouth was pursed. She did not say a word and thought that she had guessed correctly. Immediately, she was frightened. Huo Liancheng turned his head to look at Jianyun. He could not help but slap her on the head. His tone was unfriendly. "Is your brain full of water? Why are you still unhappy when you don't have a brain? What are you guessing about? Who wants your heart, liver, and kidneys? You can rest assured that after a year, you will definitely not be missing any parts." Jianyun thought that it made sense. With his wealth and the power of his family, even if there were people in the family who needed to be transplanted, there were so many people in the world, and it was enough for them to choose. They did not need to waste any effort to tangle with her, who had nothing. "But I still do not think we need to get married." Jianyun rubbed her face and pouted. "The agreement has been signed. It's too late to regret," Huo Liancheng said calmly. Jianyun suddenly felt like she had been set up. It seemed like they would arrive at Huo Liancheng's place in about 10 minutes. At this time, Jianyun's phone in her bag rang. She picked it up and saw that it was Bai Zhe. Jianyun instantly became nervous. Why did Bai Zhe suddenly call her? Could it be that her mother's condition had worsened? Thinking of this possibility, Jianyun's hands couldn't help but tremble. Cold sweat broke out on her head. She couldn't even hold her phone properly and couldn't get through even after sliding a few times. "What is it?" Huo Liancheng saw Jianyun's expression. He reached out to take her phone and looked at it. "Who is Bai Zhe?" "I, my mother's chief surgeon." Jianyun swallowed her saliva. She was so nervous that she almost could not breathe. There was more and more cold sweat on her forehead. Huo Liancheng answered the call for Jianyun. He handed the phone back to Jianyun. Jianyun's voice was dry. She picked up the phone. She was afraid that she would hear bad news, but she heard Bai Zhe's gentle and smiling voice from the other end. "Jianyun, your mother is awake. Hurry up and come over." Jianyun's mind went blank. She almost could not understand what Bai Zhe meant. "Director Bai, tell me, you said my mother is awake?" Jianyun felt her throat was dry and her eyes were dry. "Come here quickly. Your mom wants to see you." Bai Zhe expected Jianyun to find it hard to believe. He patiently said it again, and then hung up the phone. Jianyun stared blankly at the phone that had turned black. Her expression was also wooden. From the time when her mother had been in a coma during surgery until today, she had been looking forward to her mother waking up every day. But now when she really heard that her mother had woken up, she suddenly felt like she was dreaming. Huo Liancheng did not need Jianyun to say anything and sped up the car. He did not care that this place was very close to his home. He turned the car at the intersection in front of him. Jianyun had just arrived at the hospital when she received a call from Bai Zhe. "Jianyun, your mother is currently in bed number 5 of the brain surgery ward. Don't worry, I will go with you." Huo Liancheng saw that the car had not stopped, and Jianyun was about to open the door and rush down. He quickly reached out and grabbed her. Jianyun did not refuse, because she could not think about anything now. She just wanted to see her mother quickly. When Jianyun walked to the door of the ward and pushed it open, she saw her mother on the bed open her eyes and look at her. Jianyun could not stop her tears from flowing out. Mom, you are finally awake. Mom, I'm so scared." Jianyun walked step by step to the side of the bed. Her knees went soft and she suddenly knelt on the ground. She grabbed Yongfei's hand and pressed her face close to her hand. She cried so hard that she could not make a sound. "Xiao, Yunduo." Wu Yangfei was still wearing a breathing device and her head was wrapped in gauze. She looked at Jian Yun's eyes that were filled with pain and sadness. She wanted to say something, but it was a little tiring to speak. She could not say a word clearly for a long way. Jian Yun, don't worry, your mother will recover. A nurse in the ward came over and helped Jian Yun up. She gently patted her shoulder to comfort her. Jian Yun nodded and wiped away her tears. She held Wu Yangfei's hand and smiled. Mom, you will definitely get better. Although Jian Yun really wanted to ask Wu Yangfei what happened that day, she also knew that her mother had just woken up and her body was still weak. Now was not the time to ask about those things. In any case, the Boshan Public Security Bureau had already established a case. 2 days ago, there were policemen who came to ask her questions and said that they were investigating the suspect. They had waited for so long and were not in a hurry. Chapter 120, Walking Hormone. Jian Yun wanted to ask about Bai Zai's mother. She saw that Bai Zai was not in the ward, so she turned to ask the nurse called Qi Xin. Right. Where is Director Bai? Jian Yun had been in the hospital these days and was familiar with the doctors and nurses in the brain surgery. Director Bai just finished checking his room. I think he went to the office. He will be here soon. Qi Xin said with a smile. She checked the bottle in Wu Yangfei's hand and then went to the next bed to check. Wu Yangfei was in an ordinary double room. Next door was an old lady in her 70s who was currently sleeping. Mom, don't talk. Take a good rest. Jian Yun did not want her mother to be too tired. She sat on the chair beside the bed and held Wu Yangfei's hand with a look of attachment. Wu Yangfei stared behind Jian Yun. Mom, what are you looking at? Jian Yun turned her head and saw Huo Liancheng standing expressionlessly behind her. She could not help but be startled. She also heard that her mom woke up too excited and forgot about Huo Liancheng. She did not know when he came in. Moreover, Jian Yun only just realized that this ward was very lively at the moment. The 3 floors outside and 3 floors outside the door were filled with people. Most of them were women. There were nurses in the hospital and the patient's family members. These people were all gathered at the door and looked at Huo Liancheng with infatuation. Yun Duo, who is he? Wu Yangfei was also surprised and uncertain when she saw Huo Liancheng's eyes were still on Jian Yun. She asked with much effort, he is. Jian Yun glanced at Huo Liancheng and quickly lowered her eyes. She stammered, he is my friend. Wu Yangfei looked at Huo Liancheng again and found that the handsome man in front of her, who made people hold their breaths, had narrowed his eyes when he heard Jian Yun call him a friend. Clearly, he was a little unhappy. Wu Yangfei wanted to ask a few more questions, but she had no choice but to wake up from her coma. It was hard for her to say a complete sentence. So, no matter how worried she was about Jian Yun, she could not ask clearly at this time. Mom, are you tired? Don't talk and rest first, okay? Jian Yun saw that Wu Yangfei was not in good spirits. She put her face on Wu Yangfei's hand and gently stroked it. Wu Yangfei did not even have the strength to nod. She only blinked her eyes and the corner of her mouth slightly hooked up. Then she closed her eyes. Jian Yun waited until her breathing was even before she put down her hand. She looked at the remaining half of the medicine in the bottle and stood up. Where to? Huo Liancheng asked. I'm going to the doctor's office. I want to ask about my mother. Jian Yun said softly. I'll go with you. Huo Liancheng held Jian Yun's hand and walked out of the ward. Jian Yun's actions also succeeded in gaining the envious and jealous eyes of the surrounding audience. Jian Yun's face turned hot. She lowered her head and quietly followed Huo Liancheng. If Jian Yun turned around at this time, she would find her mother who thought she was asleep. Her eyes were open, and her eyes coincidentally fell on Jian Yun and Huo Liancheng's hands that were clasped together. Jian Yun felt that calling Huo Liancheng walking hormones was not an exaggeration at all. No matter where he went, he was the center of attention. Even if he always had a handsome face, his icy temperament almost made people shiver. But there were still some blind women who rushed forward to ask for his cell phone number and photo. However, all these people were treated as heir by President Huo. Therefore, these women who had been hit by nails all shifted their hatred to Jian Yun. Each of their eyes turned into knives and stabbed fiercely at Jian Yun's body. Jian Yun felt that she was really innocent. She did not want to go with President Huo at all. The doctor's office was at the entrance, and they arrived in a few steps. Jian Yun knocked on the door and Bai Zai's voice came from inside. Come in. Jian Yun pushed the door open and saw Bai Zai standing in front of the computer. He was discussing medical records with a younger doctor. Bai Zai's eyes lit up when he saw her. Jian Yun, have you seen your mother? Bai Zai passed the medical records to the young doctor and walked towards Jian Yun. Yes, I just saw my mother, Director Bai, thank you. Jian Yun sincerely thanked Bai Zai. If he had not been comforting her these days, she would not have been able to hold on. Your mother has recovered well. She knows someone when she wakes up. Jian Yun, this is? Bai Zai only had Jian Yun in his eyes. He was halfway through his sentence. Only then did he notice that there was a man standing next to Jian Yun. Furthermore, he was an extremely handsome man. He wore expensive clothes and had an extraordinary temperament. Bai Zai immediately had a sense of crisis. Especially when he saw that the man was tightly holding Jian Yun's hand, he suddenly frowned. Jian Yun's face heated up when she saw Bai Zai staring at the hand she and Huo Liancheng were holding. She lightly shook it, wanting to break free from Huo Liancheng's hand, but he held it very tightly. When she moved, his grip became even tighter. He is my friend. Jian Yun really could not say that Huo Liancheng was her boyfriend. From the bottom of her heart, she did not agree with this matter. An ordinary friend? Bai Zai's eyes lit up. Although he knew that if he was just an ordinary friend, how could he hold hands all the way? He still did not want to admit that he had failed before he even started. Yes, Jian Yun had just answered yes when she felt pain in her hand. She could not help but cry out in pain. Boyfriend, I am her boyfriend. Huo Liancheng glared at Jian Yun, his dark eyes flashing with displeasure. Jian Yun pouted and turned her head away from him. Bai Zai saw the interaction between the two of them, and his heart was full of disappointment. Actually, he liked Jian Yun the first time he saw her outside the operating theater. He wanted to use the opportunity to treat her mother, to get close to her, and then confess to her after he got familiar with her. He had also tested Jian Yun and knew that she currently did not have a boyfriend. But, just a few days further, her hand was actually held by another man. Although Jian Yun did not admit that this man with a noble background was her boyfriend, her eyes betrayed her. Bai Zai closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He suppressed the disappointment in his heart. His good upbringing made him smile at Huo Liancheng. He reached out his hand and said, "Hello." Huo Liancheng still had a cold face. He nodded at Bai Zai. Even though he had greeted Bai Zai, he did not have the slightest intention of shaking hands with Bai Zai. Bai Zai's hand froze in the air. His expression became awkward. Jian Yun saw the other doctors in the office looking over. She did not want Bai Zai to lose face, so she quickly reached out her left hand and shook Bai Zai's hand. She explained in embarrassment, "Director Bai, don't mind him, he's just like this." Bai Zai did not expect Jian Yun to use this method to help him. His eyes suddenly became gentle, especially when he held Jian Yun's soft and boneless hand. He did not want to let go. "It's okay," Bai Zai smiled. Even if he was unwilling to let go, he could not hold Jian Yun's hand in front of her boyfriend. He could only suppress his reluctance. He took his hand back and said to Jian Yun, "Your mother still needs to do some checks. I can only judge when I see the results."